Well, this is going to be a great show, everyone. I've asked James Douma. He is the foremost expert outside of somebody who's actually working at Tesla to give us kind of reveal to us and explain to us more about the upcoming teslabot and the general AI in general in its early stages. This is going to have massive changes coming to our lives and to this world, and it's coming very, very soon. So literally next month, on September 30th, we are expecting Tesla to do a demo of their teslabot, which is a general purpose humanoid robot. And there needs to be more discussion about what we're going to expect that's going to be revealed. I want to do a deep dive, not just on the form factor, so the hands, the body, where's the batteries going to be placed, the biped legs, but more importantly, the brain. So what will the bot's abilities be for thinking and communicating? The bigger picture, of course, is Tesla's road to general AI. This is it. This is the time when AI is being birthed and at some point will become much smarter than humans. So what is its impact to the world, to Tesla, the stock, and so forth? So, all right. Are you ready to get brighter?
Sure.
Let's go. Let's say hello to James Douma. James, hello. How are you doing? Thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me on. Nice to see you.
So you called yourself a deep learning dork. And I saw on Reddit as early, probably even earlier than this, 2017, that you started writing like kind of long form reports on neural networks, Tesla's autopilot way back then. And you've been a regular on Dave Lee's channel. You guys have been following full self-driving as well as bot development. But what really got me interested was you actually predicted the teslabot months before they revealed and announced the project. So why, start with that. Why did you think and predicted that it was going to be inevitable? And why specifically a general purpose humanoid form, as opposed to all the other bots we've been seeing that is like everywhere right now with all sorts of different, best practice or best form that's possible for the task itself?
Yeah, that's that's not, I didn't actually make a prediction that Tesla was going to do this, just to be clear on this. Dave and I had a chat where we talked about AI in general, and he asked, if Tesla's doing all this AI stuff, where else could they go? And the talking about where AI can go is tough, because where it can't go is a much shorter list of things. It's such a, well, it's kind of like, how much of what humans can accomplish is because they're intelligent, right? And how much is because of like everything aside from intelligence. And when you start breaking down the interesting things, if you take intelligence off the table, humans are just another primate, right? We're unremarkable. So adding intelligence makes a really big difference in the potential. And AI, people anthropomorphize it. They tend to, thinking about AI in terms of what people can do and human capabilities and whatnot, it's a way that anybody can kind of relate to it. It's a way I can explain it to my mom that, that a newspaper can write an article for general consumption about it. But it can lead you to, it can be misleading in the sense that, artificial intelligence is just essentially making the machines a lot smarter. And anytime we add a significant capability that seemed like it was off the table before, it kind of gets put in the category of artificial intelligence for a little while. And then once we can do it for a couple of years, all of a sudden it doesn't seem so magic anymore, and people stop calling it artificial intelligence. Anyway, David asked me, what else could Tesla do with this stuff?
Yeah.
And what I had said was, well, what I wish they would do, what I want them to do, is a humanoid robot. Because my observation was like, they have all the ingredients to do it, and somebody should do it. It's a really, it's going to be, incredibly impactful. More like I have very high expectations for what automated driving systems are going to mean to the world. In terms of economic impact, in terms of improving people's lives, in terms of making life safer and that kind of stuff, in terms of making life more fun, and helping people who are disadvantaged. Just like all the good things you can get out of that. But but humanoid robots are like that times 100. Because we do a lot with, I mean, cars do a lot. Transportation is a big part of our lives and our economic infrastructure. A lot of the things that we do that are fun rely on cars or some kind of transportation. And robot, a humanoid robot, it drops into the space that a human being drops into, right? If we make a robot in human form factor, and it's capable, it's physically capable in the way that humans are physically capable. It can sit in a chair, it can carry a suitcase, it can, chop a carrot. If it can do all of these, the range of dexterity and strength and form factor and stuff. I mean, there's the funny thing. One funny observation is like if you have a humanoid robot, like all the cars can drive themselves because the robot can just get in the car and drive it, right? So there's all kinds of interesting extensions that you just automatically get when you have a robot that is the shape of a human and drops into a human world. Now, at the time, Dave was on a kick where he was thinking a lot about, delivery robots, delivery drones. Amazon has a lot of flying delivery, drone technology has been in the works for a while. Amazon famously, but others too. And there are grocery delivery by drones that drive down the street. There are little ones the size of water coolers, or some that are almost the size of a car. They do grocery delivery. And Dave was, we talked about the last foot solution. Like, okay, so this thing gets the groceries to your curb. Well, how do they get to your house or whatever? And you can, if you think about the whole range of things that places you might want to deliver groceries to, right? A suburban neighborhood, a rural farmhouse, a high rise, in China, so what shape do you have to make a robot? Because typically what we've done is we build robots' bodies and we suit them very specifically to some task we want them to do. So a delivery robot that drives on the street, well, you give it wheels because they're very efficient. Roads are made for things with wheels and that kind of stuff. But as soon as you get to the curb, you have a problem. Well, do the wheels go over the curb now? Do I have to have legs or, but, a wheeled vehicle with a two-legged human-sized bipedal, delivery thing that has a hand that can open a door or press a button on an elevator, right? Once you adopt a human form, all of a sudden, all of the infrastructure of the world that we've already adapted to human beings, suddenly it works for that robot. And if you do something that's more specialized, a Roomba can vacuum your house, but it can't put away your dishes. As soon as you start specializing something to its task, you give up the generality. So now the human form is weak in many respects. It's like, because it's not specialized, it starts out with this huge disadvantage for almost anything that you want to do. And the one place it really excels is when you want to drop it into a job that a human can already do, that we've already adapted. We have all these hand tools. They're hand tools. You use them with your hands. Humans use them with their hands. All of a sudden, every hand tool in your factory is a tool that a humanoid robot can use potentially, if it has human hands. Similarly, the walkways, everything that you don't have to put on a pallet in a factory is designed to be something that's sized and apportioned and weighted so that a human being can pick it up, whether it's boxes of parts or tools or that kind of stuff. So all of those jobs, the humanoid robot can automatically do because we already make those jobs work for humans. So that's the fascination and the power of a human form, is that if you can do it. Now, we mostly, not just in the robotics community, but kind of in general perception, the humanoid robots have kind of been a joke because it's really hard to make a robot the size of a human being, that's the shape of a human being, that has physical capabilities that can match. I mean, humans are amazingly dexterous. Like our ability to move around in the world, it's just, it's shockingly good. And once I make something anthropomorphic, if it's not as good as a human, it looks like a retarded kid or a crippled old man at best, right? That's at best. So attempts to do this have tended to yield things that most people look at, and your intuition is, this thing is crippled. It's useless. It can't do anything. And dexterity is hard. It's going to be a while before robots can chop carrots, right? Like chopping carrots is a super high dexterity job.
Yeah. Earlier, you said that you had seen that you thought that Tesla has all the ingredients to make this. And so I want to ask you, what are the key key things that anybody who's trying to create a viable humanoid robot needs to have. We've seen many different kinds of robots out there, but is it true that you would need to have a supercomputer, that you would have to need neural networks? Then you would need to have the factory to produce these robots. So what other companies could possibly even do this? Would it be something like a Google, as opposed to a Boston Dynamics that have been able to show the form factor and be able to do leaps in parkour and others? But what did you say when you said, I think that Tesla has all the ingredients? Specifically, what are they that you would need to have to do something that's useful?
Yeah. So the thing that's moving fast in AI right now is neural networks. That's just where we are. A lot of AI is not just neural networks. AI is like all attempts to substantially increase the envelope of the thinking, for lack of a better term, capabilities of our machines are. Neural networks didn't start working until recently, and AI goes back like 100 years. People have been looking at lots of other ways to do things. We had chess playing computers that didn't run on neural networks. And of course, people tried to use non-neural network techniques to make robots for a long time. Neural networks are especially good at a number of the problems that AI hasn't been able to deal with up until now. One of the reasons that neural networks are so revolutionary is because they're like a puzzle piece that fits into a hole in the puzzle of our capabilities right now. So there's been this hole for a long time that's prevented us from doing all kinds of interesting things. And we needed a thing that was a certain shape to snap in there. And that was the ability to learn and adapt, the ability to take an action based on, let's see, I'm trying to use non-technical terms, a really complicated input. Like a picture, if you want to build a camera, I have a friend, we've been talking about this stuff for a really long time. And I have this canonical example of like a security camera that you put in your backyard and it just tells you if your kid fell in the pool, right?
Right.
Okay. That's a super simple device. In principle, you can make it for like $10. And when people start making them, it'll probably become illegal to have a pool where you don't have one
without
of
a camera
or any kids around, because it's such a simple and useful, and it could be made super inexpensively, but we can't do it. We haven't been able to do it until now. We could do it now. And, at some point, somebody will come up with a $30 camera you stick on the side of your house and it's Wi-Fi connected and it just looks at your pool and it tells you if anybody fell in, right? So you get an alarm system or whatnot for that kind of stuff. The thing is, taking a stream of video or an image and sorting those pixels into, swimming pool, human being, posture analysis. Are they in the pool? Are they out of the pool? Do they look like they're in trouble? Because you don't want it to go off if people are just swimming. You want, it's got to be able to understand who it is. There's a lot of subtlety to this. And doing that just from a stream of pixels on video, the input is extremely complicated. It's a huge amount of data. And the data itself, at first glance, it's very far removed from the decision you want, which is somebody in trouble in the swimming pool? You have to turn it into, pixels have to turn into shapes, and those have to turn into objects, and those objects have to turn into things around a swimming pool or not around a swimming pool. Some of those objects become people, and then there's how do the objects move in time. There's all these layers of understanding that you need to get on top of that. And in the past, when people tried to sit down and write programs, a program is like a recipe for making a cheesecake or something. You have a line, you have all these very specific lines that say, do this with the data, do this with the data, do this. And then if you see this in the data, do that, and so on. But they're all at a very low level. The problem of doing the kind of stuff like image processing, being able to look at an image and tell if it had a dog or a cat in it, it's been computationally intractable. It was completely off the table as far as a machine capability until neural networks started working, which is like inside the last 10 years. That was completely impossible. And now it's trivial. High school kids do it all the time. So the thing about neural networks, the thing they changed was they took this set of capabilities, the advent of neural networks. The thing that has changed because of the advent of neural networks is that there's all of these super important, interesting, useful capabilities that we couldn't touch before. And they were so hard that experts, people who'd been in the field a long time, well, maybe in 100 years, the field was super pessimistic because people had tried really hard for a long time to do this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, blam, you can do it. Like it was just shocking how fast we went from this stuff is impossible to it's done. So like the cat dog thing, I like that example because it's a thing that you can relate to. It doesn't seem like it should be hard to write a program that says, is this a dog or a cat? And it's just not possible. It's not like people haven't tried. It's just like you have to build something that learns from examples. It has to have the capability to learn from examples. And then and this is just the way in the real world you have to do it. You show it dogs, you show it cats, and it figures out what the difference between a dog and a cat is. And once you've got that kind of capability where something can try to do something that's really complicated, turning a bunch of pixels into dog or cat, it's an astoundingly complicated information problem. It's just really, really hard. And so now that we build systems, now that we can build systems that can take this torrent of data from the real world and turn it into something a human can describe at a human level, like, is there a kid in the pool? Like to a human, that's a very simple concept. To a machine, that's an extraordinarily complicated thing to get to. So I think you need neural networks to do robots. I've thought this for a long time. Just like I think you need neural networks to do the self-driving car thing. Well, people started working on self-driving cars, like the biggies that are out there. Most of the large, substantial entities outside of Tesla, aside from startups that are even younger than Tesla, most of which are quite small, the people working in the self-driving car space, they started before there were neural networks. More power to them. It's hard. It's a really hard problem. And it took tremendous guts and a lot of very sophisticated technology in order to just attempt to do that problem without neural networks. And when, in my opinion, neural networks came on the scene, the game completely changed. Like everybody who was in that space, they needed to rethink what they were doing. And the problem is, if you've already spent billions of dollars on a particular approach and you're technically invested in it, and neural networks just came out and you're not quite, they look really good, but does this technique have legs? Is it going to get better next year? Is it going to get better there? And ever since neural networks came out, the field has been kind of divided on it. A huge number of the experts were like, oh yeah, we saw this 20 years ago. It works for like 2 weeks and then you hit the limit and it's no good anymore. So all the people who'd made these big investments, they were suddenly going to drop everything they'd done. They had thousands and thousands of man years invested in the way they'd done it. So what's happened? They've been boiled like the proverbial frog slowly, right? Because the neural networks have been getting better and better and better, but they continue to invest in their core technologies. And it's hard, if you're Waymo, it's really hard to throw away and start everything and start over. So in a sense, Tesla kind of got lucky right at the time when autonomy became a significant thing. Now, and this is not to take anything away from them at all, because I've gone on the record. Like, I think to look at the state of neural networks in, say, 2014, when Tesla, according to the stories that we heard at the first day, at the first autonomy day, the schedule that they represent, like, I was shocked. Like, I couldn't believe that at that point in time, they were already making this big commitment to because in 2013, the neural network techniques, they were hot off the press. And most of the people in the field didn't think it was going to go very far. Only the really diehard people who'd been looking at it for a long time were super enthusiastic about this. Like, to the point where they would have gone to their investors and say, okay, that company, shut it off. We're going to start over because this new technology changes everything. Nobody said that. No. But Tesla did. Tesla, they looked at this. The technology in 2013, there was no way you could do self-driving cars with that tech. So betting the company on that technology was a bet that the technology was going to extend itself. It was going to become more capable, and it was going to turn into the thing that could let you do that. And that took a lot of guts. It took a lot of insight, and they did it. Okay. Why is this relative to robots? Because robots are the same, in my opinion, right? In fact, robots are like this on steroids. To the extent, driving a car in the real world is a fairly unconstrained problem. The number of things that can end up on a highway is without limit, right? You have to be able to recognize imagine everything that could fall on a road, or everything that any animal could walk onto the road. Yeah. Any object can fall from the sky or fall off a truck. and getting to where, you know, you can build a machine that operates with that variety of circumstances and operate in, you know, and doesn't do anything really stupid. That's really tough to do. And yet, like a bipedal humanoid robot has to do all that too. Like we want it to be able to walk on a sidewalk. We want it to be able to walk on a crowded city street and not bump into people. We want it to be able to operate in an elevator, but we also want it to be able to sit in a chair. We want it to be able to stand and, you know, navigate a kitchen. And, you know, roads are pretty complicated. A lot of stuff happens there. But when you open the world up to every single place that a human being can go, like every sidewalk, every forest, every beach, every boat, right? All of a sudden, the space is much larger. So it shares a lot with the driving problem, but it's just much, much bigger.
So, can you take the FSD Beta and make it the robot's brain? Elon's called these cars robots themselves.
They are.
But it's very specialized, like you said, for car driving autonomy. But is it a straight port, because it's just simply at the end of the day, it's a supercomputer with neural network that learns how to recognize and learn how to learn and recognize real world objects? Or is it going to be a totally separate, you know, division of the learn? Totally, they'll spread it out and create separate neural nets.
There's, like, at the end of the day, there's probably not going to be a lot of shared code between the car and the robot, and that doesn't really matter because the code is like nothing. The code of you can build. Like GPT-3, this is a large language model. It's 176 billion parameters that OpenAI developed a couple years ago. It's kind of the current benchmark for really large language models. Like people look at that as an example of like, well, 176 billion parameters, it gets you this set of capability and it costs this much to make and it needs this big a computer and that kind of stuff. So GPT-3, the actual code is like 5,000 lines, 10,000 lines. Like it's a few pages of code, right? But it's a 176 billion parameter model, because in a neural network, it's not a lot of code. The code is really simple. The challenge, you know, this is one of the things that we learned from learning algorithms. They're not actually that complicated. Like you can write them in, I mean, if you want to really optimize it to your hardware and do all kinds of things, you can throw all these bells and whistles on. And so the actual code base of GPT-3 will be bigger than that, right? But I think it was, if you're interested in, there's a great documentary that was done about AlphaGo. You can get on Netflix, YouTube.
I've seen it.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great intro. So there's one of the guys on the DeepMind team said, AlphaGo is a very simple program. Like people don't understand. It's a few pages of code. There's almost nothing to it. And it's true. And yet it solved this unsolved challenge that nobody thought was going to happen in 10 years or something at best. And this is the power of a learning algorithm, that figuring out the exact mix of things, like how to get it to learn and to learn fast and to learn with not too much data and to learn something that can run on a reasonable computer. Like those are tricky, but it turns out that once you have the answers, it's like E equals MC squared or whatnot. You know, there's all this work and it gets distilled down to this one little truth, which is incredibly powerful once you have it. Right. And that's deep learning is a series of those little truths that we're learning. We're getting all these little nuggets of information that end up being incredibly powerful because they let us build these systems that can do things that we've dreamt of for hundreds of years and are now within reach. So building a humanoid robot is within reach now, but it's not, it's not happening next year. You're not going to see.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. So the body seems like it's going to be easy to do relatively, because we've seen all these other examples of humanoid robots. Just recently we saw the Cyber one, Xiaomi Cyber one. But of course, Boston Dynamics is very impressive. But the hard part, when I was watching Dennis Hong, he has in University of California, UCLA, and he's had this lab for decades. And he shows 7 different robots, and he said the hardest part is bipedal walking. But is it time? Because you can create the humanoid body, but can you actually have the brain to do this when we barely have robotaxi, or not even near FSD yet, or it's getting there, it's still learning how to recognize stop signs and stoplights and the roadway. Is it time that you can actually teach a humanoid robot? And how would you teach it? Is it just watching somebody do an activity once and then it'll do it many times and then that's what it'll be able to do that activity? Or how's that going to happen?
So there are many approaches that are being taken to teaching. But let me take a step back. I would like to submit that the body is not actually easy. And one of the reasons that I wanted to see Tesla do this was because I could see them making the kind of commitment to making the bodies work that's necessary. So Boston Dynamics, they do some great stuff, but almost everything they make is the kind of stuff that some talented guys with a machine shop can make. Like you can start with billets of metal and that kind of stuff and do this. That most of the actuators and most of the precision elements of a Boston Dynamics are they're things that they buy. And they're things that were originally designed for not robots. They were designed for something else, right? So they're building a robot out of not robot parts. It's not a bad robot, but if you make like the original iPhone, the first iPhone that came out, and you compare them to iPhones today, and they seem super clunky. And one of the differences was that the original iPhone was made out of not iPhone parts. The parts weren't made for an iPhone. They couldn't have been because there weren't any iPhones. They weren't made like the CPUs, the chips, the batteries, all the stuff that went into it. The battery, some of them were made for phones, but nothing was made for an iPhone at the time. As the supply chain made more parts that were for the iPhone or for a Samsung Galaxy or for a smartphone, the capabilities got dramatically better. The talk time got longer, they got lighter, the display visibility got much better. The camera capabilities have just exploded as people started making cameras for these things. And that's what we're going to see with the robots. When robots are made from parts that were designed for being part of a robot, the capabilities are going to get quite a bit higher. Now, people in the market right now, they don't have that luxury because there's no market for 1 million or 100 million robots a year to feed this giant, multi-trillion or billion-dollar, huge industry that it's going to take to make all of this super specialized components to make really good robots. So several years back, I sat down and I tried to do a first principles can you build a robot? Like what fundamental new technologies are necessary to build a humanoid robot? Like, do we need any special materials technology? Do we need new battery technologies? What kind of new chips do we need? And there were a few things that popped up to me when I did that analysis. Because the question I had in mind was, could you make a $10,000 robot that has the full range of dexterity and capabilities of a human body? Like just the body. We'll just take the brain off for now. Assume that you've got the software, or putting the software aside, could you do it? And when I walk the thing, I mean, there are some things that are tough. Like we don't have anything that does skin today. So like covering this, we don't have a technology where you can cover the surface of the robot with a sensor, a tactile sensor that has sort of the range of capabilities of skin. There are some things we don't have. Most of the stuff we want a robot to do, you don't really need skin, right? We need vision, proprioception, the ability to manipulate objects. And there are some advantages that human hands get from skin. Like the range of motion that a human hand has is just shocking. Like it's an incredible piece of biomechanics. And we don't make anything that can duplicate this today in the mechanical world. And we're going to need to do that at some point if we want to make robots go. Skin is part of it for human beings, but most of the things we really need for, say, dexterous manipulation of tools is stuff we can get to without skin. So I left that off. And, when I took off the things that I thought were not going to be necessary for robots that do jobs in factories or robots that deliver goods and that kind of stuff, I couldn't find any technologies that we really didn't have. The thing I thought we were the most behind in, and this is the thing that informed my comment today, was I looked at the actuators. The power density, the torque density that you can in principle get from an electric actuator. Like say I'm building a humanoid robot and I want it to have roughly the shape of a human being, right? So I need to get the actuators inside the arms Like having cable gizmos that hang off the back of it and whatnot, you can do that, but it won't be able to fit into a human world if it's not roughly human sized. So if you want to make the robot inexpensive, like if we're optimizing it for that, we want to fit the actuators into the joints. I could put a bunch of motors in the chest cavity and control all the arms and whatnot with cables running through, but they have there's all these mechanical problems that you run into when you do that. Like, cables stretch, they have to run over tension points and that kind of stuff. They add bulk. I mean, there's advantages of centralizing your actuators, but there's all these problems it introduces. The ideal actuator is one that's got all the degrees of freedom. It fits inside the joint space that you want, and it has a torque power profile, which is roughly comparable to a human joint. We want a robot it weighs about what a human does. It's about as strong as a human is. And we want the actuators to be simple. We want them to be reliable. We want them to be watertight, right? We want them to not generate so much heat that the thermal there's all these constraints, right? And it turns out that you can, in principle, make electric. These are just basically specialized electric motors. They turn at very low speed and they have extremely high torque. They're very compact and they're extremely efficient. So I sat down and I did some paper, rough designs on this kind of stuff. And I decided you can totally make this stuff, but it's totally unlike any actuator that exists today. There's no industry, because the thing about electric actuators today is you can get a lot of power density by spinning it relatively fast. So you trade off torque for power. And that's the way we build motors now. And if you want something to move slow, you put a gearbox on it. But you don't want gearboxes in your robots. Gearboxes have all kinds of problems too. You want a really high torque actuator that's quite compact. And that could totally be done. But when I thought about, the investment you'd have to make, because you've got to develop all these new, really core technologies for doing this kind of stuff. And then you have to develop them to a high degree of polish in order to do all this kind of stuff. And when Dave and I were talking, I'm like, if I was going to pick a company that could do that, it's Tesla. Like, I can't even think of who number 2 would be right now. And it's not just that. When I think about, the thing is, they're willing to go at a problem and work it to get the right answer. They'll work it out from first principles, look at what they need to do, and they'll make a really big bet on something they know will eventually pay off, even if it's going to be really hard. And so, when they started working on FSD in 2016, the advertising was all, we'll have it in a year. That's what they thought, autopilot, right? They made a huge bet, but when they didn't have it in a year, they didn't give up. They know. And I really believe they will get there. The thing is, we don't know the end of it. You don't, until you build it, you don't know what it looks like until it's working in the real world, because it's complicated. It is doable. It is absolutely doable. We're the core technologies that go into this stuff, they're advancing at just an unbelievable rate every single year. Every year and for the last 10 years. Deep learning has advanced more than the experts the year before would have predicted. Like every year this happens. And despite the fact that we're shocked again and again, we continue to be shocked. When AlphaFold happened, people were thinking protein folding. I don't know if you know much about
Yes, protein. I know AlphaFold. I followed all this stuff. It's amazing. Yeah, they just mapped every single protein.
Protein folding's hard. Like, it's a problem that has been worked for a really long time. Hundreds of groups of really smart researchers have worked this problem for 30 years, and they've made slow, incremental progress. And if you just looked at their rate of progress, which is what you do when you're inside the field, you look at the rate of progress, and they're like, maybe in 100 years, I heard they're hoping for a breakthrough, right?
Yeah. One PhD for every protein folding discovered. Takes one PhD, 4 years.
Yeah, kind of. A better description is like it's $1 million of protein or something like that, right? So prior to AlphaFold, I think the entire space of proteins that had known structures was like 180,000. I think the PDB had 180,000 proteins. So at like $1 million a piece, it's $180 billion worth of investment to get 180,000 proteins. And those were just the 180,000 that we thought were the most important. And somebody pointed out, I think the day that AlphaFold came out, was like, we spent $180 billion to get these first 180,000 proteins. And the next, and that was way less than 1% of the universe of proteins that we were potentially interested in, right? And the rest are free. I mean, DeepMind turned on AlphaFold and they did the rest and they gave them away for free, right? So something that's 100 times or 1,000 times bigger than a database that had vast amounts of money and expertise poured in, it's done, right? And this wasn't something that anybody a year before AlphaFold happened would have predicted. The AlphaFold guys themselves, they didn't know it was going to happen. They dove into it. They tried it. In fact, AlphaFold 1 and AlphaFold 2 are pretty different approaches in some core ways. So they took a stab. They got some really good results. They had the first version of AlphaFold. Woohoo! And then they did the second one. And it was like, boom, done, right? In 18 months. It's shocking. And this stuff just keeps happening. And the things that are externally visible that you can write an article in the New York Times and that a lay audience is going to be impressed with is much smaller. The people who are actually in the field, who've been looking at these much more specific metrics, these much more narrow problems that are hard to explain to outsiders, those things are just falling like dominoes. I mean, it really is shocking how fast this stuff is going. So with that as your foundation, if that's the engine that pushes your capabilities, something that seems impossible today, many things that seem impossible today are going to be possible in 3 years, in 5 years.
So I want to ask you, I want to go back to the humanoid body, because you said it wasn't as easy as I initially said it was. But since the conversation is headed this way, how is Tesla going to get the millions of videos that they need to have in order to have a robot be able to learn and be able to understand its environment and tag all the labels of real world objects, which is what they did for the cars, right? They had millions of miles of video, and then that's what they fed it and learned how to recognize what a stop sign is and everything else. How do you think that they're going to do this? I've been predicting that Tesla is going to need to have AR glasses. They're going to need to have everybody wearing glasses. So when I open the fridge, it's going to record that, and it's going to see what a Coke can is, what a beer can is, that my fridge is open this way. That could be one option. But how are they going to do this without the millions of videos that they have with the cars versus the robots?
There are many different approaches to doing this stuff, just like there are many different technical approaches to doing the full. So Tesla has their approach that they're doing. And there are other people who do neural network based self-driving approaches that are not doing what Tesla is doing. So
simulation.
Tesla built a fleet so that they could gather a lot of data, and they have a lot of data. So they use their data, like their data is really core to their approach. But there are other players out there who, cannot in their wildest dreams get access to the kind of data Tesla has, and they're taking different approaches. I mean, Comma AI is an interesting example, right? Comma's betting on technical advantage. Like Comma AI, they need a pretty significant leap forward for their technology to start being able to drive cars, like really drive cars the way FSD is trying to drive cars. It's not impossible. Like the tech has had these great leap forwards many times in the last few years. Tesla's approach does not require the same degree of great leap forward that Comma AI's does. Other players, because they take different approaches, they're betting on other technical advances that do not yet exist, that they themselves might make or that someone else might make, that they can adopt into their framework, just like Tesla can adopt stuff in. So Tesla talks a lot about their data advantage, and they do have a data advantage, but the data advantage isn't the only advantage they have. And collecting a lot of data is not the only way to go about doing these things. And in fact, Tesla has, to some extent, moved away from capturing tons and tons of data. The auto label system, actually, in certain respects, it uses a lot less raw data to produce more valuable training stuff. So the amount of data that you need depends on, as neural networks get better, we get better and better at training them with less data. And eventually it's going to take a lot less data than it takes now. There's different kinds of data. There's data which has been crafted to be exactly what you need for your problem. And then there's data out in the world where there's tons and tons of data, but it's not a good fit for what you want. And so there are techniques that use all this data that's out there. Because, I mean, if you look at all the video on YouTube of human beings, there's a lot of training information there. Like if your algorithm can use data from YouTube to figure out what people do and how they do stuff, and there's no small number of people out there working specifically on the problem of how to turn YouTube videos into stuff that can be used to train a humanoid robot. The other thing you can do is like video game. I mean, video game is a simulation. A simulation is a video game, right? These 3D video games where you move around inside space. So simulation is a great component of how you can go about training, because the physics of most of physics, the basic stuff, like there's objects, space is 3D, this is how light travels through it, this is the shape of things, and these are the rough forces you need to lift a box or push a box or open a door. Like the rough outlines of that stuff can be encoded in a simulator pretty simply. And there's a very large body of work that's going on in learning to train robots in simulation, not just robots, other things too, but so that's got huge strengths. You can have, if you've got enough computers, you can gain all the experience you want. You can have these outlandishly unlikely scenario, like you can drive your car and crash into trees and stuff in simulation. It doesn't matter, right? You can explore the whole space of possibilities and let the computer decide, okay, I don't want to run off the road because I got a bad reward for that last time. So that's another technique that will get you to simulation. And inside the space of simulation, there are many different approaches that you can use to using simulation.
Well, I've heard Elon say, in order to do full self-driving, you need to have three things. You need to have a supercomputer, you need to have neural networks, and you have to have 1 billion miles of video of people driving. Now you're saying, well, maybe they can get away with just simulation.
Well, eventually people will do it with less than 1 billion miles of driving. I mean, human beings learn it, and we don't drive 1 billion miles before we get there. Human beings, we develop a lot. So human beings have there's this term foundation model, where you learn something basic from just a lot of unstructured data about the real world. And then you take the model that you get from that and you use it as a component of a more specific system. So GPT-3 is this kind of model, this big language model that I mentioned before, the 176 billion parameters. So language models, it used to be that if you wanted to train once upon a time, somebody had to sit down and say, this is the noun, this is the verb, this is what the sentence means, here it is in French and German, Italian, right? You'd need this very carefully crafted data, and you'd feed that into networks or models, and you would train that way. But nobody trains language models that way. Now, for a while, we trained language models with these very specialized corpora, which had been, you would gather like a whole lot of books that you had electronic data on, or you would gather a bunch of web pages, or you would go to some forum like a chat forum or something like that, and you would gather a bunch of data, and then humans would go through it and they would curate it to structure it in a way that less data would get you more learning, and you wouldn't learn the wrong things, right? And now they don't even do that. They crawl the internet and they just take it all and they just dump it in a giant hopper, and they have a machine crank on it, and they do a little bit of automated, but the corpora are trillions and trillions and trillions of words. Like they're way too like no human can touch the amount of data. So you can do these very rough things. And so you dump that huge amount of data. So what's going on here? Like, how is it you can just dump anything in there and it learns? And the thing is, they train a foundation model. And this is actually pretty clever. All that GPT does when you train it is you give it a sentence and you block out some of the words and you tell it, what are the missing words, right? That's the whole task. You give it another sentence and you block out some of the words and it has to guess the missing words. So this seems like I'm training a neural network that just guesses the missing words in sentences, right? Like, how is this useful for like translating French into German? It turns out it is really useful. I mean, for doing that kind of thing, or for answering questions, right? What happens is, if you train it on enough data, it doesn't, in order to be really good at guessing the missing word, it has to develop a very sophisticated model of the language itself. And that becomes a foundational model. It becomes a language model. And then once you have that language model, you go out and you build this language model. And, GPT probably costs $5 or $10 million to train. That's just the final training run. Like they spent millions and millions of dollars like working out the techniques. It's a super, super expensive model. But once you have it, you can build all these other things on top of it, because now you have this building block, which is like language. And once you have language in a box, there's all these other things that you can do with it. You can make a chat bot. You can make something that like reads newspaper articles and tells you if the sentiment is positive or the sentiment is negative. You can have something that searches through legal documents and says, is this document related to this document?
All right. So let's get back to the bot then. Mm-hmm. So I had assumed
foundation models for bots.
I had assumed many of us thought that the way that you're going to teach the bot is to copy. So you're going to watch me grab that Coke can from the fridge and open in the fridge, grab the Coke can and close it. Now it's going to be able to redo that over and over again. It's going to watch me fold a napkin, and then it's going to copy that. But are you saying that maybe the may do this is almost like the way a human baby is born, like a toddler? It figures out, how to balance itself, how to just grab things no matter what it is, and then just figure out something manipulable.
This is a moving target, right? Yeah. Because the way that you would try to build a self-driving car like 5 years ago is different from how you do it today, because the technology has advanced, right? The field learns, and as the field learns, you discover better ways to do stuff. Now, there are things that we know in principle are doable, but we haven't a clue how to do them right now. I am, myself quite confident, many others are quite confident that we will get there in terms of developing these foundational capabilities and eventually being able to build machines that can learn from a relatively small number of examples for a specific task. So this is a thing a human being can do, right? Like I don't have to learn to move my arm if I want to learn to juggle, I can already, see objects, and I already know about gravity. There's all this stuff I know about the real world. So when I start, it's not like I have to train a baby to walk and talk and recognize objects and all that kind of stuff. And then I give it the juggling balls, and then it learns, right? It's when an adult learns to juggle, you start with all this information. And one of the great things is that it's naturally unstructured information that goes into foundational models. It's been observed for a long time that one way of modeling the way, human performance in the real world is that the human brain is constantly predicting the next thing you're going to see, the next thing you're going to feel, the next thing what's going to taste, what something's going to taste like. So, one way of thinking about what the brain does is it builds a model of the world, and it's constantly predicting. Now this will happen. Now this will happen. No, this will happen. No, you'll hear this. You'll feel that. He'll say this. He'll do that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And it's wrong a lot, but it's constantly fine-tuning that model. And it uses that model to predict what will happen if it does various kinds of things. So you get to a point where you don't have to do the experiment, and you don't have to have the data, because you've built a world model that will tell you, like, I could take an Aborigine out of a rainforest, right? And I could sit him in my living room, and I could walk over to the fridge, open the door, take out a beer can, crack it, right? And he could do that like that. He doesn't need to practice it 50 times, right? Even though he doesn't know what a refrigerator is and he's never seen a beer can before, right? He can learn that really quickly because he's got a very sophisticated model of the world and himself and how he moves. And that's what we'll do with robots eventually, right? So the first robots probably won't, like everything, the first version of something gets built in some hokey way as a proof of concept, and it was our first try. So the first robot that we get, it'll be like that. The Boston Dynamics is, they built robots from not robot parts because we don't have robot parts really, and they're doing, I'll call it a first try. I mean, I don't want to put these guys down. They're very capable and they do really
very impressive.
Yeah. But it's a first try, and the field is really going to change. And, you're going to see something come out, and then a year later, you're going to see something dramatically better. So whenever you talk about this stuff, you need to keep in mind that every prediction you make, it needs to have a time frame on it, because 2 years later, 10 years later, the field has moved way beyond that. So, my expectations for what we see for TeslaBot, I'm really excited to see what they've done, because what they show us will give us an idea of what problems they think are important, what they're focusing on in the short term. Like, I'll be really interested, are they working on the actuators, right? Like, I think the actuators in the long run are a really, really important problem, a really hard problem.
Were you surprised to see that it was 3 fingers? Or is that what
you mean that picture?
Yeah,
that came out? That's not, those aren't robot hands. I'm sorry, that's a mannequin. You're talking about the AI Dave picture with the chrome hands?
Yes.
Yeah, those are non-functional. That's just a picture. And I've seen a lot of interpretation, because I think people think that that's actually the robot.
Sneak peek.
Let me just point out, if you were making a robot, you wouldn't put stainless steel fingertips on it, right?
You would.
It'd be trying to pick up a Coke bottle with chopsticks or something, right? Because you need something with a squishy, grippy surface on it on your fingers. I'm sorry.
Interesting. You're just dropping a lot of gems here right now. Okay, well, that's really cool.
You can see where the joints are, right? It's 2 pieces of metal with just like a pin through them. There's no actuator in there to move the finger.
All right, let's talk about the body again, because I've got a whole bunch of questions. And I know you said that you're not going to, these are all speculation. Who knows what's going to happen? But what material are they going to use? We've heard that they don't necessarily need to use steel, because they want it to be something that's a little bit more lightweight, but also less chance to hurt humans. I don't know if this is optimistic or that's, they might still use steel. Where's the battery going to go? Is there a battery large enough to power this? How strong is this going to be? Where's a charge port going to be located? And can it walk? Do you think that they're going to come out with a biped? Giant AI, Robert Scoble had done a video of them, and I'd watched it just a month ago, and they were just torso up because they don't want to worry about the fact that the bipedal walking. Dennis Hong said that walking is the hardest problem, and they've not solved it. They've not figured, after these decades of them trying to figure out how to make a robot walk, yet you had Boston Dynamic that's all doing all sorts of things. So,
right.
Yeah, bunch of questions.
So you frequently, so people, when DeepMind was working on Go, experts in the field were super skeptical about the ability to do that. People who've been in a field for a long time are often not they often don't make the best predictions about what happens when the revolution comes down. So all due respect to the experts in the robotics field, but I think a lot of robotics experts are going to end up being wrong and surprised about how things proceed. I do think that Tesla will do a bipedal robot. I don't know if they will demonstrate it. Bipedal locomotion is a hard problem. But we are making really good progress, and I think bipedal locomotion will be there. So, to get a humanoid, there's a bunch of core capabilities you need, and one is locomoting in the world. Another one is just understanding the world around you. My own evaluation of this stuff is that perceiving the world around you is actually a much harder problem than the locomotion part is, and that significant parts of the locomotion problem that we have right now are that we build locomotors with a very limited and error buggy understanding of the world that they're trying to locomote through. We have to, because our perception isn't very good. And when you handicap your locomotion system in that way, it doesn't perform as well in the world. When perception gets better, locomotion will get better. People do locomotion for robots in simulation, including sim-to-real layers that are laid on top of this stuff, that are shockingly, it just
learns on its own how to walk.
I mean, they do a ton of simulation. They do it. That doesn't mean it's solved. But, this is one of those things that if you asked people in the field 5 years ago, like, would we see these robots that can do super graceful backflips or that can do parkour or whatnot in simulation, most of them would have said no, because it's hard to do that stuff. They've been working a long time. And they didn't get anywhere, just like the people doing protein folding had been working on protein folding a long time and had been kind of stuck. I think we're going to have these moments when the field develops a new technique. They figure out what the formula is for adapting this fundamental capability to this fundamental capability. Now we get the synergy, and all of a sudden we get a new, in a span of a year or two, we get a new capability. So I think locomotion is going to come. I think bipedal locomotion is going to come relatively soon. One of the big handicaps for bipedal locomotion, it's very scale dependent. So a bipedal locomotor that's 18 inches tall has completely different dynamic constraints than one that's like 6 feet tall. And then when you add weight and that kind of stuff, it's a problem. And robots are expensive. So building walking robots, especially if you put a torso on them and they're full of expensive computers and that kind of stuff, is a very risky undertaking, right? Because they fall down a lot and they will break. So, because you want to make them lightweight so that you don't have to have big batteries and big actuators in them. But if they're lightweight, they break when they fall, right? Because they're not super robust. So that's one of the attractions of doing it in simulation is that your robot won't break, and you can do that kind of stuff. But then you have to be able to make the transition to reality from simulation. And there's still some challenges there. It's getting better. We're getting better at like training robots in simulation and then sticking that in a real robot body. We mostly don't do that with humanoid robots right now. If you just want to locomote, all you need is hips and legs, right? And so people working on locomotion, they build a robot and it's hips and legs because all they're really caring about is walking around right now. It's cheaper to do that kind of stuff. And you learn a lot of useful stuff that way. The four-legged spot robots, those are pretty cheap because they don't fall down as easily. They're closer to the ground, and you can coat them in rubber and that kind of stuff because of the dynamics. And the spot robots, they're getting really good. ETH Zurich does a bunch of like really eye-opening work in terms of training these completely general locomotors. And they've got completely general locomotors now, just like in the last year or so. They can basically walk on any substance. They can walk when they can't see the ground. They make trade-offs between vision and proprioception. They're just amazing. Like they've made incredible progress in the last couple of years on that kind of stuff. And I expect they will continue to do that. Four-legged robots are going to come sooner because they're just an easier engineering problem to solve because of the shape and the falling down kind of thing. Bipedal is harder in certain respects. Actually, once you get to the scale of a human being, bipedal gets a lot easier. One of the things is the cheap robots that are 18 inches tall, it's actually harder to make them walk in a weird thing because the moment of angular inertia of a taller object is lower, so you have a lot more time to respond and response time, for the dynamics and anyway.
Is it a given that Tesla's going to do only a humanoid robot versus, like, I was joking around with some friends saying they're going to do an R2-D2 in addition to the C-3PO?
I think they'll do the humanoid robot. I don't know if they'll do any narrow specialized robots. Maybe they will. On the way, you could do it. You could do all kinds of things. I'm excited about the humanoid robot. My preference would be to not see them get distracted with narrow specialized robots and to stay to go for the prize, which is and I expect the robot to take a while. Like, I'm super excited about what they're doing. I think on the way to the full-on, the one that can fold your laundry, the one that can put dishes in the dishwasher, both of which are extraordinarily hard things to do for a robot. On the way to that robot, you can do lots of intermediate things that are really useful. Just for Tesla, just a materials handling robot that carried cardboard boxes around the factory, like that would make their materials handling system inside their factory really useful. It's a narrow problem. You can have relatively restricted actuators, restricted environments. Like, that's a good starting point for that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think bipedal is pretty fundamental. I think they'll do bipedal. That's my prediction. We will see if I'm wrong about
September 30th comes. They're going to do the demo of the bot. They're not going to be. It'd be embarrassing if what they came out with wasn't as good as Boston Dynamics. But they need to show the brain. They need to prove that this is different than all the other bots out there. What kind of demo would you do if you wanted to show that this is truly an intelligent robot that can navigate the environment, recognize what to do? Will it talk? Start with that.
So talking is separate, and we all get to see state-of-the-art talking all the time. If you own a cell phone and you play with the apps, you can see state-of-the-art talking, and that's what they've got. And Tesla won't develop the talking themselves. There's no point. It's not their strength, and they don't need to do it. I think whether it can talk or not is probably much less important than whether it can listen. I think being able to take verbal instructions and being able to take instructions by having a human demonstrate an action and having it mimic it, I think that's a pretty basic capability that you want. I don't think they're going to demonstrate that at AI Day. If they have a humanoid robot that can walk around on stage, that's a pretty good demo. AI Day is a recruiting event. It's not an investor event. It's not a PR event. I don't expect to see them selling the robot soon outside. I think we'll probably see them using it in their factory for a couple of years. And we'll probably, I would expect them to demo that, as a demonstration of progress that they do. And I think we'll see that for a while before they bring it outside, because the thing is, every 12 months that you delay bringing a product to the outside world, the product that you can deliver is going to be dramatically better. With the cars, you want to get to scale. Like Tesla doesn't want to have 10,000 of their own cars that just their employees are driving to gather data, right? That's a different kind of scale. But they can gather a lot of data and get a lot of utility just with the robots that they can use internally. And I think they'll do that until it makes sense, like from a data gathering standpoint, to try to push the robots out.
Yeah,
that would be
on
my
the other hand. Yeah, on the other hand, Tesla's modus operandi is whenever they do a demo and they show a prototype, the actual product that comes out of that is pretty close to that. It's rarely that it's, they don't like to do a prototype just to wow, and then when something comes completely different comes out.
I would guess the robot will evolve significantly between the version that we see and the first product that comes out. As I said, I do not expect to see them productize something. I mean, the Semi is getting introduced by them. They have a few partners. They're going to roll the Semi out, and they're going to get some experience with it in the real world. The Semi didn't go from concept drawing, we built them, and now anybody can buy one and use it however they want to. I think, it makes more sense to do the robot that way, where, when you do go outside, you pick somebody who needs 100 robots or 1,000 robots, and you understand their environment, and you can. This is kind of how industrial robots already get used, today. I mean, industrial robots are fairly general, but they're highly specialized to any individual task. A general robot, I think we'll see the teslabot evolve from something which is fairly general, but only used in fairly narrow applications. And we'll see the generality of its application gradually unfold as the software gets better and the foundational capabilities get better. Kind of like autopilot started out on highways and wasn't very good at highways. Then it got okay at highways, and it got pretty good at highways. And then now it's quite good at certain highways. I mean, I don't know how good it is if you take it to Italy or Brazil, right? And, drive through one of the really old cities there. But, it's gotten a lot better. And then when they brought it to surface streets, it was good at highways before it was good at before it was good on suburban roads. And then, and parking lots are really hard. They'll be far down the list of, when I take my car, like, I don't even try to do the parking lot stuff. A lot of people do. More power to them. But to me, FSD right now is at the zone where, like, it's pretty good on surface streets, pretty much any surface street. It's not so great with intersections. It's getting a lot better, and it's terrible at parking lots.
So, is the brain going to fit in the head? Is the battery going to fit in the torso? Is the brain the same size as what the FSD computer is in the car?
So they'll do custom silicon for the bot, just like they do for the car. The custom silicon they use in the car, it would actually work fine in a bot, and you could drop it right in if you wanted to.
How big is it in the car?
It's
what, you got an example?
So this is just like one printed circuit board. This is the old one. This isn't but the new one is just the same shape. The silicon, this has a pair of redundant systems in it that are, the hardware 3 is redundant, so that if anything fails, the car can still safely shut down and drive. So in a sense, it's twice as big as it needs to be because of that. The electronics, I mean, this is an automotive grade packaging. And in a car, there are things that you care about, that you care about more than making it super lightweight and super small. But yeah, it could be this big. This is a lot. This is a shocking amount of computation. And the silicon that's inside this, I don't know if you've ever seen the guts of one of these things, but the phone is like 3/8 of an inch across the top, and the rest of it is battery.
Yes. That's
so you can make there's no technical obstacle that will prevent them from putting the silicon for inference that operates the robot inside the robot's body. In the short run, right now, supervised learning, unsupervised learning, we use really big computers to train neural networks. Like we were talking about the GPT-3 computer, it ran to train GPT-3 took, probably a data center. What would it be? It would be hundreds of racks of computers for like 3 months or something like that to do one training run on GPT-3. But you can run GPT-3 on like a box the size of PC that would sit on top of a desk. So that's still pretty big. But it's tiny compared to the training. Similarly, in the short run. So in the long run, we want to get to where you build a set of foundational models. So there's these core things, which are like reflexes, the ability to control your body, basic perception and whatnot, that will be trained externally from data for robots. You download those, they go into the machine as a set of core capabilities. And machines probably, we want them to have a local capability for optimizing their act. We're going to want robots eventually to have internal world models that they can use to make decisions about the world that they do. It's like, actually, FSD is doing this a little bit. So, FSD, they demonstrated at Autonomy Day, this little Monte Carlo rollout system that the car was using to figure out how to navigate parking lots that had a lot of obstacles. So that actually has a little trained world model of a parking lot and what cars do and what pedestrians do and that kind of stuff. And when it tries to figure out the way out of the parking lot, it runs these various little simulations to figure it out. So the ability to develop and refine those world models at some level, that's a capability we'll want the machines to have. But you don't need a data center for that, because those capabilities are built on top of a lot of foundational capabilities. The foundational capabilities, they'll get trained in data centers. So, the brains that we will see, and I'm going to make predictions, this will be for the first like 10 years that we see humanoid robots out in the real world. We'll see very limited ability to use world models to do that. And most of the capabilities will be based on these foundation models that will get trained in data centers and refined across a fleet of robots. And then the individual robot, because there'll be a fleet of robots, just like there's a fleet of cars, right? Wow. The robots will learn collectively. The overwhelming majority of what they learn will be collective. And a small amount of it will be specific to the robots eventually. Like the cars will never get there. I don't think we are likely to see FSD get to a point where individual cars have a significant need to learn on their own, right? But robots will be a little bit different because, cars overwhelmingly operate on a shared road system. So the overwhelming amount of learning and information that a car gets is useful to lots of other cars. But everything my robot learns about my living room is not super useful to other people's living rooms, right? To the extent, because rooms can be highly unique, right?
Yeah. All right. So brains can be in the brains. 2 eyes, or are they going to put
they'll
cameras?
Put the CPU, they won't put it in the head. The battery, the CPU, actuators will go on the arms. Arms will be actuated structural. You could conceivably put batteries like lower down in the legs, but I don't think you will. You'll see.
Where's the batteries?
Human beings are built the way we are for significant reasons. Actually, our brains go in our head because they need to be close to all the sensors that are mounted on our head. Robots, we probably won't do that. The heads will be cosmetic probably on robots. You'd put the compute system probably in the torso along with the other stuff. But
and where's the brain? Where's the batteries?
The battery will go in the torso. you don't want heavy stuff in the limbs, because then the actuators are constantly having to move.
So it's not going to be structural pack. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
Little
sure.
batteries in
Why not?
the
Good
muscle
structural
here.
pack for the body. It totally makes sense to do that.
And how big is the battery going to need to be to power this, and how many hours will this be able to do, and the strength and so forth? Have you thought about how big the battery might need to be?
Well, so when I did my proof of concept, just like the first walk, the question that I was trying to answer was like, is it possible with the rough technology we have today? Like if you spun up the industry, but you didn't have any big advances in material technology, if you didn't have any big advances in electronic technology, or if all you had was working with the existing industries that we have, devoted to building robots, but the same basic tech, could you build a human-sized, human dexterity, $10,000 robot that could run 24 hours on a charge, doing the same level of physical activity a human does? So I sat down and I figured out what the biomechanics and energy dissipation were for a human being over 24 hours, which is really simple to do. And then
simple to do. Okay.
Yeah, and a lithium battery, it works fine. You can put enough lithium battery in the torso. So now, the thing is, if I go to CATL and I buy and I buy batteries today and I use actuators that I can get off the shelf today, there's no way you can do that. You can't even get close, right? One of the reasons that the actuators are really, really important is because they're the primary energy dissipation for the system. That the brain itself is going to be 100 watts or 200 watts or something like that. And that's the brain is actually the thing which is the least efficient. A human brain's 20 watts. Like on average, they peak at maybe 100 when you're
most powerful
really
computer.
thinking hard. But the robot brain is going to be 100 watts or 200 watts or that kind of scale in the near term. But the actuators, robot bodies can be really efficient energy wise, like because electric motors, if you have a motor which is well suited to the tasks that you're giving it, the efficiencies are crazy high. They're like 90%. Human biomechanical efficiency is pretty high, but it's not that high. And humans run on 100 watts, basically. The average power usage of a human being is about 100 watts. So 100 watts for a day, that's a battery size of a basketball, right?
Okay. Battery size of a basketball. So it's
just
very doable.
Speaking, right? A gallon of milk, something like that. You can put it in a robot torso anyway.
Okay. And then humans are powered by food. How is this going to be recharged? Is it going to be at the butt area? Is it going to be at the finger? It won't be the finger, right? People were saying it's the finger, but that's going to, you want the fingers to be it's going to be touching.
It's really interesting what people focus on.
I mean, this is for fun. This is a lot of it fun. Did you think about this? Doesn't matter.
No, I have not thought about it, to be perfectly honest. You'll put a plug on it. Like I think inductive charging is a waste of energy, so you won't go inductive. You'll put a socket on it. Maybe it'll have a Tesla connector. You get the little Tesla socket.
Yeah, and that's right. So it's either the hip or it's going to be the back, and you
side of the torso.
Stand by the wall. At the wall. That makes the most sense. Or
it's a humanoid robot. It can grab the cord and plug it in itself. Right? It doesn't need an adapter or anything like that. The whole point of a humanoid robot is like it can put on its own pants. You don't have to dress it, right? It's a humanoid robot.
My God, this is hilarious. First use cases. So you're saying it is going to be a factory. I think we're all assuming that that's going to be the case. We saw a job description that came out recently. Did you see this? Where they're looking for a software developer or a tech person, and it said you're going to be working closely with I think they worded it carefully, and or a humanoid robot in a factory. It said.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a perfect fit. They have all these big factories. A factory is kind of a restricted microcosm of the world. There's a lot of basic stuff about the world you need to know to operate inside a factory, but it's still a fairly constrained environment. They can come up with these constrained activities to exercise the robots in, where they're around people who know what they're doing and who know about the robots. You're not exposing the public to it, right? It's all employees who've been trained to deal with them. And
how's it going to be better than what's already there? So I saw Amazon's warehouse, and they already have all sorts of robots
Mhm.
flying around. There's the ones that carry things.
Yeah.
What exactly can they use the humanoid robot for to say this is better than all the other robots I can buy that does not look like a human, but it does the job of moving packages? Like if it's just moving packages to me, there's already bots that are doing that.
Mhm.
What's the usefulness?
Yeah,
I
using
thought that maybe,
robots in the
yeah.
factory is not going to be a big benefit to the factory in the short run. The thing it's a benefit for is for learning how to build humanoid robots.
Okay. So, yeah, I thought maybe in the car factory, if they can show putting in the seats, how you open the door and you have to go inside something, maybe a humanoid version of a robot's much more faster, quicker, better. Or at one point they were saying it's very hard to touch foam, and so maybe this version
The
of a
fluffer bot,
robot
yeah.
can do the foam thing instead of having a human.
Will we get AGI before we get a fluffer bot that works?
Was it you or
It
somebody
might
said
be,
that
one of those NP complete problems where, yeah, I mean,
fluffer bot?
when your humanoid robot can install the fluff above the battery, then you'll know that you've achieved something, right? But
Because
in the
it
short
needs to
run,
know.
I don't think if people are thinking that like Tesla having a humanoid robot that they
Yeah.
can deploy in their factory is going to be a big advantage to the factory in the short run, I think
Okay.
that is probably not true. When they can crank out zillions of humanoid robots that are cheap because they're mass produced and they're completely general, and you can quickly train one by just having a human show it a job or give it some basic instructions verbally to be able to do a really wide variety of flexible jobs, then the flexibility of those robots will start to be really useful because at their cost point, it will be hard to compete with them. But in the short run, like a specialized robot always beats a humanoid robot at the task the specialized robot is built for. So yeah, the Kiva robots that Amazon uses in their warehouse, humanoid robots are never going to touch that. Just like a human being hauling boxes cannot compete with a forklift. The forklift is going to win carrying pallets around. The advantage the humanoid robot has is the incredible generality of it. And so it's not until you get to the kind of scale where the generality is playing to your, where the strength of generality is something that you can use in your factory that you start seeing the benefits of that. And until then, it's going to be a giant black hole that they're pouring money into.
Wow. Okay. Lots of gems. Just you keep throwing them out. Lots of things that I thought was going to happen, and you're just basically saying, no, 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 that's not what's going to happen at all.
I'm sorry.
No, no, you're brilliant. I mean, this is exactly why I wanted to hear all this. Is it going to be made of steel? Or
No.
is it going to be some new material? It's going to be like plastic?
Well, I mean, you make robots out of plastic except for structural members, and maybe you make those out of plastic too. You want something light and cheap that's easy to fabricate in complicated shapes, and that's strong enough to do the job. So, a human is,
Yeah.
5 or 6 feet tall and weighs 150 pounds. It's got to be able to carry. I mean, the heaviest thing will be the actuators will be heavy until they get optimized, and the batteries will be heavy probably forever because you'll put as much battery in the thing as you can fit in there and that it can easily carry. Plastic works great. Why not use plastic? It's cheap. It's super easy to fabricate. You could 3D print your robot, right? You can probably 3D print out of plastic materials that are strong enough to do the basic robot stuff in the short run. So
is it going to be? Is it going to be the stamp? That's going to be like, oh my god, carbon fiber. Like what's his name? Harrison Ford. Star Wars. It's like boom, and then there's a robot comes out.
Oh! You stamp one out, huh?
Yeah.
I guess anything. Yeah, I mean, in the long run, you don't 3D print. Maybe you do in the long run. It depends on how the printers go. But I mean, 3D printing is great because the design space is very unconstrained. The disadvantage of inexpensive 3D printing is that the core material strength properties are not generally as good, and the fineness with which you can make detailed components isn't that great. But for major structural members, like you could do it, or Tesla's great at bending metal. They've got all this metal stuff, right? So you could make a metal skeleton for the thing if you wanted to have a framework that you were going to hang all the other parts on. Like for prototypes, in the beginning, that might be the right way to go. Like in the long run, there'll be composites. You won't use metal in robots because you don't. I mean, if you want a robot, like, you know, if you're going to build a robot that needs to be bulletproof, you probably want to use metal, right?
Yeah.
There are specialty robots that you might want to use metal on, but for the general purpose robot, I don't think.
Right. My assumption was what he needs to do, what Tesla needs to do is manage kind of the way the civilization, the society is going to accept humanoid robots. And so they need to be not afraid of it. And that's why he was very, very particular to say, this is going to be 5'8". It's going to be very 100-something pounds. You're going to be able to run away from it. It's not going to be able to hurt you. So I think at the beginning, it's going to be very, very, you know, it looks good.
It'll be interesting to see how long that because
it's just marketing.
One of the things that it would be really great to have robots for this is getting off track and talking far future stuff, but you know, robots will make really great police officers.
Well, we all thought
because that's one of those dangerous
security guards first, right? Walking around the perimeters, visuals, and recording everything. And like you said, I see something, and that's a child running, and I'm going to go and check it out. You know. Yeah,
it's I mean, there are all kinds of dangerous, dirty, boring jobs that it would be in that we would like to do. And security guards, they're one of those dangerous, boring jobs that humans do right now and do poorly generally. And I mean, it's a totally undercompensated job. It's frequently a high risk job. It's a super boring job. Police jobs are like that too. And, you know, it would be really great to be able to hand that off to a machine that was reliable.
The RoboCop. We don't want to do RoboCop again.
What's that?
You know, the movie RoboCop.
Oh yeah. No, I think that'll be something that in soldiers. I mean, people don't like the idea of like robot, but imagine you build non-lethal robots, right? It's one of my fantasy products is I call it the ninja robot, right? Like a robot that, I mean, if you look at the amazing, you know, graceful capabilities that we can do robots in simulation with right now, you could imagine, you know, it's just like, you know, AlphaGo went from, you know, being mediocre to good to like the you know, the latest generation of Go playing machines is so good that the best players in the world, they can't even understand the games anymore. They're like transcendentally. It's like two different gods playing Go, right? Yes. And humans spend all this ink trying to just understand what the thing is trying to do. Imagine creating a creature, you know, that has the physical, you know, shape of a human being, but it's got that like godlike ability to move its body around, right?
Yes.
You know, train your jujitsu for 1 billion years in simulation or whatnot, and now you know you've got a robot that can disarm anybody without hurting them, right?
You're scaring me. All right, I want to get to know you just quickly because you just brilliant. You've been saying so many smart things, but you know, I want to know something about you that Dave Lee does not know. I mean, you and Dave are pretty good friends now, so I need to like somehow feel like I got to know you, something that Dave does not know about you.
Well, Dave, every conversation we've had has been published, so
I know. But is there some personal thing about you personally that you can share for me? Like,
man, I already came out as autistic, right? So,
what did you know as a kid? What were you thinking you were going to be as a kid? Did you always know that you were going to be in technology?
Yeah. Now, my parents have all these stories of me as a kid. Like it was super obvious what I was going to be. I was not somebody who ever struggled like, oh, you know, fireman, police officer, astronaut. None of those were on the table. It was like,
what was the first exposure? What was it? Chess?
I played chess for a little while. I was never into games. Like I like making stuff, and I like thinking about how things get made. So, I couldn't afford a computer. My family was totally blue collar. So I learned to program a computer on my knees at the local Radio Shack in front of the TRS-80 demo that they had.
Yes.
And I taught myself assembly language by I bought a Z80 reference manual for the assembly language. And I would write assembly programs in my head. And then I had actually learned all of the opcodes so that I could assemble them down to byte codes, and I could sit at the computer and I could type in the byte codes and run the programs.
Wow.
So that is probably the geekiest thing I ever did in my life. I spent a summer memorizing the Z80 instruction set so that I could run an assembler in my head.
You and I know Radio Shack. 90% of our audience won't know what it is, what it was like.
Is it really? I guess it's really gone now, isn't it? That was a big part of my childhood.
All right, let's end this with rapid fire predictions. I know you don't want to do this, but I'm gonna, just take a guess. September 30th comes. What are we gonna see? What are the capabilities? What is it gonna look like? What is a demo? Yeah, just anything that you can predict, and we're gonna see.
Optimus is a humanoid robot. They'll bring out a human. I think. Like if they can make it walk around on stage or do any kind of locomotion demo, like I'll be impressed. If they can do some basic, manual handling of things on a table or whatnot, like I would find that impressive. I think that the things that are going to be impressive to the audience that they want to impress as a recruiting event are probably not the same things that are going to be impressive. Like I have a hunch that the Twitterverse is going to be totally underwhelmed by what gets demonstrated because they're not going to get it. Tesla's just started using neural networks for bipedal robots on the kind of scale that they want. Like it's a big project. They have to build a lot of infrastructure in terms of tools and testing environments. They have to decide what their whole approach is going to be. They can do FSD for a lot. You can extend FSD, its ability, the perception model, and you can write heuristic programs for a while. Because FSD is basically neural networks for perception and neural networks producing some planning stuff, and then a significant amount of human-written heuristic code that sits on top of that defines rules for how they want the system to operate. That'll change over time. Like more of that code will come out. So, a good question is like, are they satisfied with that for the humanoid robot in the short run? If they are, you might see demonstrations of some kinds of, manipulating objects in the real world or moving around inside the real world that would be useful and meaningful stuff. But those won't be demonstrating any kind of really foundational capabilities. If you want to impress roboticists, you probably want to demonstrate some really simple, some really basic capabilities that show that you have a functional platform that's capable, like it's broad and it's relatively general. And then maybe some pretty fancy demos of what you can do in simulation and how you're translating that to the robot. Yeah. Like that would be an approach that you could do. Because Tesla could go the sim to real route, where essentially they plan to train in simulation and then demonstrate that they can take that learned behavior that they've trained in simulation and move it onto the robot body and have the robot body actually produce something to do something in the real world. Like if you could do that on a bipedal robot, experts in the space would be really impressed because that hasn't been demonstrated yet. But it's not going to be necessarily really impressive to a lay audience.
I love it. And Dojo is going to be live, and they're going to show that maybe the simulations there are much faster.
They'll even talk about Dojo. Maybe they will. So
Elon, AI Day 2, not talk about Dojo. What?
Yeah, I hope we get I hope they tell us what's going on with Dojo. My guess was that they're at the like single rack, or 4 rack kind of scale, that they don't have a full Dojo running. So if they come out and they say, we've got a full up Dojo, 10 racks with all the plates running, and we can run some basic stuff on it at scale, like I'd be really impressed if they were at that level. Now it being Tesla, they do that kind of stuff. Sometimes they get way out ahead of the game and they have really impressive results in a short period of time. Normally, for this kind of development effort, you do a lot of work at a single rack before you move to a multi-rack system. And So I would kind of expect them to be at the single or 2 or 3 rack kind of scale.
Okay.
Now that's a lot of compute. It's useful. There's all kinds of stuff that they could do on that. It's way too soon for them to have the range of tools available for Dojo that would allow them to offload everything that they do on their NVIDIA. Like I think it's a fine thing to say, yeah, Dojo will be successful if we want to turn our NVIDIA cluster off. That's true. It's certainly true. But the thing is, it's kind of not it's not a good idea to try to make Dojo do everything that the NVIDIA cluster does, because you can buy an NVIDIA cluster, right? Whereas you can't buy a Dojo. Don't use Dojo to do things Dojo's not good at. It's just a waste of Dojo, right? So keep your NVIDIA cluster and use it for the stuff Dojo's not, because Dojo is super specialized for the neural network training part of it. I mean, that's what it's going to be 10x better than the NVIDIA cluster is. But there's all this commercial software that you can buy, that you can just buy, and you can plug into the NVIDIA cluster and it just runs. And if you want to do that on your Dojo cluster, you got to get 100 guys, and they got to sit in a room for a year to make that package work for you. And it's just not a good use of your money and time. So I don't expect to see them actually turn off the NVIDIA cluster, but they might not use it for training neural networks, which would be equivalent. Like if Dojo is good enough that they never want to train neural networks on the NVIDIA cluster, that's a win, because that's where all the money's going in compute. Like that's the real heavy lifting for Tesla's future compute needs is, that was the thing. I tell this story that came out of when Google first started spinning up neural networks for language models, they had all these services that they wanted to roll out, and they couldn't because their estimate is like, if we actually took these services we want to run and we ran them across all of our markets, we don't have enough data centers. We would need many times more data centers, 10 times as many, 100 times as many. And so they were forced to build a specialized neural network inference chip because they didn't have enough computers in the whole world to run the services that they wanted to. So they built a chip that did 100 times more, 1,000 times more than their regular box did. And so they needed 1,000 times fewer of them. And that enabled them to use neural networks in their data center at the kind of scale that they wanted to. And so Tesla's kind of in that space. Like, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, Tesla, they'll need 100 data centers or 1,000 data centers if they really want to do all the neural network training that they could use in that space. And so, if you're going to need that much data center, it's worth spending the money now to make it so that costs 10 times less, when you get there, than it does right now. And that's what Dojo is. The promise of Dojo is that it could do that. Now, it's possible NVIDIA or somebody else will beat them to it. But I think, if there was a really good neural network training platform out there that was really inexpensive and really flexible, and there's tons of software for it and everybody used it, you'd just buy it. You wouldn't bother running. So in that case, you'd just shut Dojo off. And so NVIDIA could go do that. I don't think they will. NVIDIA's got reasons not to, because it would undercut their existing business, but maybe they'll do it. Eventually there are a lot of startup companies that are trying to do it. But the thing about Tesla building Dojo is, at a minimum, Tesla knows that if nobody else succeeds and nobody else does it, at least they have a solution, right? But it's like, the seats in their cars. I think they would have been happy to buy the seats from somebody else, and just nobody would make the seats they wanted. And so they made their own seats, right?
Okay. Well, James, thank you so much for your time. I definitely got a lot brighter. So thank you for doing that. You are so full of, I kept calling them gems, because there's so many things. If I listen back to the recording here, that it just was brilliant. So thank you for that. Everyone, please follow James on Twitter. He's at James Douma, Douma. And everyone, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate this. Thanks, James.
Thanks for having me. It was a fun chat.
Thanks.